Welcome to the Defenders of Business Value, the podcast that helps business owners unlock the value they've built and exit on their terms. I'm your host, Ed Meisegland, and for the last 30 years, I've been helping business owners prepare, grow, protect, and ultimately sell their businesses. Whether you're a business owner, a buyer, or an advisor guiding others through the process, if you want to make your last deal your best one, you are in the right place. So let's get started. Last month, I had the opportunity to participate in Butler University's first inaugural Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition Conference. And my good buddy, George Wellmer of Tupelo SMB, we presented on how to earn preferred buyer status. And it was extremely well received. And we had lots of questions. We had a short amount of time in order to cover an awful lot. So George was kind enough to come back on the podcast to talk about how this preferred buyer status thing works. George is a friend. And he and his brother, Zach, are on to something with this Tupelo SMB. There are CRM, and there's a bunch of tools that's going to help increase deal velocity for buyers as well as sellers. And that's really what I'm excited about. And so George always takes my calls, and they're always long. This podcast today, we talk about just that, how the system works, how to become a preferred buyer, and what the future looks like for preferred buyers. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with George Wellmer of Tupelo SMB. All right, George, welcome back to the show.
Excited to be here.
Are you really?
Well, this time we have more than 30 seconds to talk, so
yeah,
we can ramble a bit and provide more value.
All right. Well, so where we left off, or, let's just go ahead and kind of bring everybody up to speed that there's so many buyers out there, right? And so many buyers are disappointed that they're not getting looks, or they're just late to the game. And as I indicated in my introduction, is that you have Tupelo. Tupelo is a CRM for deal shops like mine, and we're trying to fix this, right? And the CRM's helping, but whether they're working with us or anybody else, how do you get preferred buyer status? So why don't we start with that? What is preferred buyer status?
Yeah, I think the thing too for buyers to understand is competitive deals. And there's certain things that make a deal competitive, or seller's discretionary earning reaches a certain mark. Industries, think of service-based businesses, niche manufacturing, things like that. Government contracts is another keyword, or recurring revenue. They're getting hundreds and hundreds of inquiries. The brokers are receiving hundreds and hundreds of inquiries on these particular engagements. And it's very difficult for the broker to see, okay, I have 500 people that inquired upon this business in the last 3 days. How do I know which one of these buyers is a legitimate buyer? And the process a broker generally does is, the first thing is, do you have the money to buy the business? Do you have experience in the industry? And I'll use experience very loosely here. And then are you a competitor or an employee of the business that's being sold right now? And if you're reaching these check marks, thresholds, then the broker will then move you forward in the process. If you're not able to show the broker very simply and cleanly that you do, they're going to move you to the side and focus on the other 499 buyers that have inquired upon this business.
One of the things that I think buyers fail to realize is, just because you signed a confidentiality agreement, it's not cover charge to go look at the business. And whether it's an industry shortcoming, there's so many buyers, they don't understand that this is the process and what the sell side is going through, trying to ensure that you are who you say you are. You truly have a genuine interest in the business. And regardless of, do you have the money? Do you have the operational experience? Do you have capital, access to capital, and all the other check boxes? There's another layer to that, right? And I think what I'm trying to convey is, I think that buyers need to understand just that there's some big risk to the sellers in just sharing information. There's a reluctance. Now, they've engaged people like us to handle that, right? To handle that on their behalf. But it's still, especially let's take HVAC, right? Where everybody's chasing that. Is it the competitor or the private equity group the best buyer, right? Everybody needs to know more than just the 3 check boxes that we talked about. My question is, in a crowded space, how do you become that preferred buyer or get on that short list for the broker. Your user base only continues to grow. So I'm certain brokers are talking to you about this is how we look at a preferred buyer.
Yeah. I mean, having a relationship with advisors definitely helps. So when the advisor sees your inquiry come through, they know that, so-and-so is a legitimate buyer. I've talked to them before, like that'll push them to the top of the queue. The other thing too, like is kind of the squeaky wheel gets heard a lot of times. You sign the NDA or fill out the buyer profile. I mean, you can wait a day, but then you can reach out if you have a relationship with that broker that's selling the business. Hey, I just completed the buyer profile and the NDA. Do you have any other questions for me to move forward in the process? So rather than like as a buyer framing it as I signed the NDA, release me the SIM, reframe that question to be, what else do you need from me? What else do I need to show you to demonstrate that I am capable of buying this business?
That's interesting because I think there's an underlying buyer frustration, right? It's like, golly, do you want to sell this business or not? Why are you putting up so many hurdles? And it's not uncommon for we get an NDA and within a minute, there's another email, send a SIM or send SIM.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. There's like these waves that are kind of like hitting each other right now that are butting up against each other. Where if you look at some of like the newer age brokerage firms, let's call them like tech enabled, they're doing blanket NDAs. You sign one NDA, you get access to everything. And that means the SIM for all the deals. So some buyers are used to that experience. Other buyers that have came from like banking or private equity or things like that, where the process that they're used to is of a controlled process. So when a seller presents an opportunity to that buyer, when they're in this private equity or banking role, they say, here's the teaser of the business. They're giving it to them. Sign this NDA. And when you sign the NDA, then you get access to the deal room. So that's what they're used to. And then they come down market because they see that they want to buy a $1 million roofing business. They think that's the process of how it's going to work. But in reality, it's not for most traditional brokers.
I don't think that the individual, like the seller that is going to be attractive to all three buckets of buyers. So strategics, individuals, private equity, right? That upper Main Street, lower middle market kind of business that we're seeing. They're coming from a space where all these buyers have been identified, right? On the larger investment banking deals, they've been approved. This going to a marketplace, coming to a broker, that doesn't happen. They know who the buyer is. It's just a matter of going to find that buyer and identifying the synergy and bringing them and pitching them, for lack of a better word, pitching them on this is the best buyer for the business based on these 50 or 100 or 200 buyers. That's the investment banking process. And again, those buyers would have never been contacted had the seller not already approved it. And that's what I think is happening, that we're seeing they're coming downstream and expecting the same type of process when it's, I don't say entirely different, but there's a lot of nuances that aren't the same.
Yeah. Most of these deals being sold in the SMB space are not like auction based. So it's not like the advisor has 100 prospects that they're sending out the initial blast to. That 100 gets whittled down to whatever, 10, 5. And then those 5 are working to see which one's the best for offers. Like we have this whole pool of unknown people that are interested in buying the business. Step 1 is identifying, are they real? Do they have enough money to buy the business? And if they do, like, okay, let's push them forward in the process, if it makes sense.
The other thing I wanted to talk about is, I've said on the show before that I have been writing a book. And one of the things that you have found, and I found a long time ago, is that, a lot of these shops are 1 and 2 man shops that have very little inventory and therefore lack systems, right? So how does a 1 man show or a 2 man show, they get an engagement and now they're inundated with all these buyers? First thing I wanted to ask is, do you work with those? Is it worth working with them? I say probably, but how do you get to the top of the food chain with those type of people? Because the bulk of this industry is 1 and 2 man shows.
Yeah. So from our side, like we have, like Tupelo, like we have systems that they can leverage to help process these inbound inquiries efficiently and then push the buyers through. We're talking about, we have like AI agents that can review buyers and push them through the process. But like if we take a traditional shop, I don't even say a traditional shop because the industry's so bifurcated, factored out, is like it's one person who might be doing this as like a part-time job. They have a listing because maybe their lawyer friend referred them this company, and this company is actually very attractive to sell. So historically, this business broker or M&A advisor has just been using Excel to virtually manage their whole entire operations. They get this new attractive listing, they post it on one of the marketplaces out there, and then it starts receiving all these inquiries. This is probably the worst case to be in as a buyer because the broker who's selling the business doesn't have adequate systems in place to make sure that you, if you're qualified, to stand out. So what they're doing is they're going through everyone who signed an NDA, and before they release files to them, they're giving them a call. So if you didn't sign that NDA in like, well, let's say 5 minutes of the listing being posted, you're just in this queue waiting to be called. And that's when it goes back to like, if you wait a day or two and you haven't heard from the broker, like that's selling the business, it's probably a good time to pick up the phone and give them a call and ask them, what else do you need to move forward in the process?
I'm not a fan of auctions. I mean, it seems as though there's, with the buyer demand, there's just so much coming through, right? And I think that the broker, as well as the owner, they start getting indications of interest, and they start getting, oh my gosh, my business really is attractive. I don't want to lose this guy. So the buyer saying, you need to respond. The broker saying, well, we're in the middle of a process. I've got 100 other people just like you. And I think that the fear of not taking the process to completion, that's how buyers lose it, right? So they get 2 or 3 immediate great buyers that are at the top of the list, that got in first, that then submitted their IOI, and now they've locked it down. And back to systems. If you have a process and a system that you're following along, and you're getting that kind of activity, your duty of care to your seller is to run it through, run the process, and then make your decision. You probably have more feedback on that than me. What's the take with those type of brokers?
I mean, the one thing I think we have to preface here is there's huge discrepancies in interest that companies face. Oftentimes a business will come to market and maybe it'll get 5, 10 inquiries, right? And the advisor that's selling that business has to do a lot of legwork to reach out to those prospective 10, try to market the business around. So then you have that 10 inquiries, let's say, is virtually could be half of all the businesses out there. And then the other half, maybe not even half, maybe 10% of the other ones are getting hundreds, if not, close to 1,000 inquiries. But a broker has a pretty good idea when they're bringing a business to market of what type of activity they can expect on it. So if you're expecting a listing or engagement to get a lot of inquiries, you need to be ready for it, quite frankly. So you need to be able to ready to process this huge pool of buyers that's going to come through.
I hear you. And again, Tupelo does a great job in kind of facilitating that process. And one thing you mentioned that I don't think a lot of buyers know that, and we'll have it in the show notes, is your marketplace. You probably need to talk about the throughput on buyer inquiries, because you told me you're number 2 compared to Biz Buy Sell.
If we look at all the different sites that buyers can go to express their interest in companies for sale, we're generating the second most amount of inquiries for our brokers out there. So we're processing a pretty heavy load of inquiries from buyers right now, which is good.
I'm curious about scraping, right? I keep on hearing so much about Claude Code. They're out there scraping all of the sites and so on and so forth.
OpenClaw, yeah.
I heard, that, one of the other newer marketplaces, they got in trouble for, scraping all of the sites and putting on their site. And whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But if I'm a buyer, how am I leveraging that? Is AI really doing me any good, or is it better just to kind of run the normal buyer course? And I'm not going to hold you to it, because everything's changing quickly.
Yeah. So if we look at 5 years ago, when everything was kind of evolving in the space, there was a lot of startups, let's call them, that were going to try to take down Biz Buy Sell. So what they were effectively doing, and there's marketplaces out there that do it now, is they'll scrape Biz Buy Sell, and then they'll post all of Biz Buy Sell's listings in a new, clean, flashy platform. Then if you somehow find this platform because they're on your Instagram or where have you, and you inquire through a listing through that platform, what they're doing is then they're actually sending an email to the broker that owns that listing to say, hey, we have a buyer that's interested in your listing. And on the broker side, they have no idea that their listing was scraped from this buy sell. They're like, we don't know who you are. And generally speaking, in the SMB M&A space, nobody works with buy-side brokers, generally speaking here. I know there's exceptions. So when the broker sees that, in their head, they're thinking this is a buy-side broker that's trying to collect or take a portion of my commission, and they generally ignore those type of emails that come through. So that's one thing that's happening from like a marketplace creation. We still see it a little bit today. The other thing is if a buyer is using some sort of like open claw to inquire upon listings, a broker is not going to know that the buyer is using a bot to inquire upon a listing. I mean,
so I'm trying to figure out, is this good or bad? If I'm a buyer, and I'm losing out on deals, because we're going to talk about buy-side brokering here in a minute, but I'm curious to know, is that a good thing that I have the tech to go to these websites and scrape them? Although I'm still kind of astounded that just about every marketplace has a save my criteria list. I'm curious to know, is that something I should put my time toward?
I would say, like we prefaced 2 questions ago, we were explaining how if you're not early in the inquiry process, then you kind of get lost, particularly on very competitive deals, particularly when the broker doesn't have systems in place. So if we assume that a lot of brokers don't have systems, and we assume that some of these brokers are going to sell high quality listings, it would behoove the buyer to be very early in that inquiry process. So I can see a lot of logic for a buyer to spin up some sort of agent to look for, okay, if an HVAC company comes in Ohio and it has more than $500,000 in seller discretionary earnings or cash flow, whatever you want to call it, adjusted EBITDA, inquire upon that business. I mean, I'm not advertising for it or against it, because I do think like there's more nuances to just looking at these like 2 metrics and saying, let's go.
That's not a heavy lift to do that, right? To program that. In fact, I suspect when somebody hears this, I'm certain somebody's going to be peddling it on one of the marketplaces. That,
well, I'll caveat this. I'm not saying I advise this. I'm just saying I can see the logic in how a buyer wants to stand out early in competitive deals.
totally get it. Like I said, I'm just sitting here going, wow, that's really interesting.
To your point, though, just because you sign an NDA doesn't mean you move forward in the process.
Oh no. And since we're here talking about Claude, let's talk about, are we going to call him Elvis? Is Elvis going to be really my AI agent?
Sure, we can call it Elvis for.
All right, we'll call it for now. The working title is Elvis. So Tupelo has rolled out, or at least in beta. You take it from here, and I'll tell you all my 2 cents in quality control issues.
All right, so we've laid the foundation that a lot of these listings get a lot of inquiries, and it's very difficult for brokers to find out which one of these inquiries is like a high quality buyer. So historically, what brokers have done is they've manually reviewed the buyer profile. They may have called them, looked them up online to see like what their LinkedIn is, done a Google search on them to make sure that they're not like a felon or a competitor or an employee of the business. So the broker has done this. And again, this is very difficult if you're working with like 500 inquiries, or they've hired people to do this on their behalf. So what we've done is we've created the ability for brokers to create AI agents inside their system, and they set up the criteria of how they want the agent to review buyers on a specific listing. So they create their listing inside Tupelo, and the last step is, this is what the minimum qualifications a buyer needs to have to move forward through the process. Then when the buyer inquires upon the listing, the agent is looking, okay, do they meet these minimum qualifications? Meaning, do you have enough cash? Are you a competitor? Are you an employee? And then there's like custom rules that they can put, like maybe it's an HVAC business.
There's a lot more that we can add depending on how much you want to put the buyer through the meat grinder to figure out them. There's a lot more to it. So just the basics, we can go a lot deeper than that. But carry on.
Yeah, I'm saying this is why we have to do it on a per listing basis. Because sometimes some listings, it's as simple as, do you have enough cash? And you're not a competitor, you're not an employee, you move forward in the process. Other listings, you might need a certain certification to own the business. Maybe the broker is looking for a certain experience. Brokers analyze these deals in a variety of different ways. So we've made the agents flexible enough to be able to I say do as good a job, if not better, than the brokers to vet buyers when they come through. I mean, we've had people create agents that are like, they have to have like fire safety experience. And then we're like looking up these buyers to see if they have fire safety experience, when that process would have taken, 10 minutes to look at that one buyer. And we see that that one listing had 300 inquiries on it. So
I mean, it's the future. I mean, we're talking about Claude, reaching out. Well, your bot talks to my bot, and we'll figure out when we're going to interact with one another as humans, I guess. What's been the feedback? And before you answer, I mean, I'll tell you on my side, and we may be different, right? We may be more cautious about this. There's a mistrust in AI. We take this whole thing really, really serious, and we would prefer not selling a business than damage it by just being careless with it, right? We're slowly coming to terms with there's enough guardrails that this is helping and we can have confidence. What's been the other feedback with the people that are in beta?
yeah, so everything really has been positive, and like the feedback we hear, a lot of it is trusting the agent. And trusting the agent is also done when you prompt the agent. You're prompting it in a way that you can generate value from it. So if you have really tight guardrails to kick everything out for a manual review, then that's a lot more difficult to reap the benefits of an AI agent, because you're virtually saying, call out every single buyer that comes through for a manual review. And then I don't know how much value you're actually getting in those type of situations, other than you have a lot of context on that buyer that you wouldn't have had in the past. So you can read that context, and then you can make a quick decision to go forward or not. You're not actually doing the Googling and looking them up to make sure that they meet these criteria. It's funny you say this too, Ed, because if you look at like, I don't know, how Sims were prepared in the past, like the broker would spend weeks like doing manual research on the industry and making these documents. Now they can just like industry research, they're just putting it into ChatGPT or what have you, and copying and pasting and putting it in. So they have trust in this to sell the business. But I mean, it's just steps.
No, that's a great counterpoint. I mean, to your point, I mean, I get it that there's a lot of AI going on, and I'm certain that there's other shops that aren't taking security serious, right? As far as what's getting out to the ether, so to speak. But this isn't going away. That buyers are going to interact with this, I don't want to say toll booth, but for lack of a better word, it is. You're going to have to interact with that before you move forward. And I think the value is going to be with the relationship with the broker. If you're going to interact with it, right? And preferred buyer status, right? I know full well that we're going to have buyers that person shows up, we've toggled something on that gives them the ability to bypass me and just get what they need in order to make the decision on interest. Is that the way you see it working too?
Yeah, I mean, we hear this all the time. Like, you have a relationship with this private equity group or, this buyer, and you know that they have cash, right? But effectively what you want to do is, I don't know if an AI agent would be this, because it's probably cheaper to just do an automation where if this email address comes through and the business meets this threshold, then it would auto unlock files for it. That's definitely an option out there.
I think this is a lot for the individual buyer more than the strategic or the private equity group. I mean, as soon as we hit the marketplace, right? Or if we go directly to them and we bypass the individuals, right? This really is helpful for the individual buyer. Just from the standpoint of there's so many of you out there in the ETA space that want to look at the deal and know that they're competing with other outfits much bigger, probably more sophisticated and more, that have the capital easier. But you want to get to that deal first. So I suspect that the individual buyer, in order to be competitive in a competitive deal space, is going to have to do something like this.
To that point too, I mean, also what's easier now than ever for advisors is to do notifications to their database. So like they have a new engagement coming to market, they can query their database by buyers that are interested in that particular segment or size or what have you. And then they can do these blast out to the buyers to let them know that they have a new engagement. Sometimes the advisors are doing this bringing it to the marketplace. That's becoming more and more common, but I would still say the vast majority of people are just posting it out there and then letting the inquiries come in organically.
I'm real curious to know when there becomes a advance notice, right? That there's a preferred buyer premium. You got to pay X number of dollars a month, but you're on the list and you got a week head start. I'm just kind of curious to know if that's where the industry starts heading, especially when we have tools like Tupelo to help.
It definitely could be a viable option out there. The catch there is the advisors that are selling these businesses are incentivized to post it to the public marketplace because they get so many inquiries. So they might do a blast out to this like exclusive pool before, but they're still going to post it to the marketplace because then they'll get 200 fresh people that flow into their system. Where if those 5, high prospect ones don't buy the business for whatever reason, they have 200 people out there. The other thing too is like the advisor has to show, oftentimes they have to show the business owner, we're doing work to sell your business. And one of the things the business owners is going to look at is like that carries value is, oh, we have all this interest in your business already. And that's what the Biz Buy Sells and Tupelos of the world do really well.
Yeah, I get you. You and I don't want to say we differ on buy-side brokers, right? It's funny because for the most part, we've not been much of a buy-side broker. But I'll tell you, in my 34 years, we have more buy-side brokerage deals going, right? Where we're serving on the buy side rather than the sell side, sourcing deals for these buyers. I remember when we were talking that you're not a fan. Our slide said buy-side brokering is not common and often sell-side brokers refuse to work with buy-side brokers. And that part's true. I don't need you to work with on our buy-side. Buyer's paying. Whatever.
That's the thing that I want like to be clear is a lot of times I think buyers don't know that buy-side brokering is not common in the space, as well as many sell-side brokers refuse to work with buy-side brokers. So it's not that I'm pro or against buy-side brokers, because I do think there's a world where like, buy-side work for brokers is amazing work. Don't get me wrong there. I definitely think that. But a buyer should know that if you're paying a broker buy-side engagement work, you want to ask the questions, okay, what is this money going towards? How are you going to actually drum up opportunities?
Sure. So a lot of our listeners, the buyer listeners, fail to understand it. And I think this was one of the more compelling slides that we had in our presentation, is no one understood that we're spending 50 to 70% of our time on vetting buyers, that it takes so much time. Now, as a deal shop, I think our value is created after we have the buyer to close, right? Versus this. But the bulk of our time is spent working with these buyers.
Let's rewind 20 years ago or 10 years ago, because the industry is more tenured. If you've talked to a business broker, you'll know. When they'll tell you, like back in the day, as a buyer, you would have to come to our office, you'd have to sign the NDA, and then we could have this conversation. So that's kind of like everyone was like trained on. So that like wed out a lot of buyers who were like tire kickers. Because if you're a tire kicker, you're not going to fly to Indiana. You're not going to rent a car and drive to your office and sign this NDA. So if you were doing that, like you were very serious about buying the business. Now it's so easy to just like click and go. What's happened now is 99% of all inquiries a brokerage firm receives never buys a business from that broker. Only 1% does. So the brokers are spending the vast majority of their time working with these 99% that's never going to make the money. And a lot of our systems that we have in place and like these deal qualification agents are flipping that on its head so the broker can only spend time with the 1%. The industry is changing right now.
Yeah, it is. And for the good. I'm super stoked on where this whole thing is going. One of the other slides that stood out was how to stand out the initial contact with brokers. So I'm going to go through the 6 things that we talked about, right? Because you were saying, yeah, squeaky wheel gets the grease. All right. So speak the language. What does that mean?
When you talk to the advisor, you want to be able to demonstrate that you know the industry well. So like one of the things when we've talked to business owners or people who have bought businesses in the past and successfully done it, is they've done a lot of industry research on particular industries. So they've talked to other business owners out there that maybe are not in that geographic location, and they've reached out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in the industry. Do you have 15 minutes time for a chat? So they know what the business is for sale, is the whole vernacular and what to look for. So that really helps the buyers stand out, because while you have all these other generalists, you're showing that you're a specialist.
Interesting. Well, I'll tell you, the AI part of the world now, it's showing up that, you don't know crap about it. You made a great prompt, and these are the questions I should ask the broker on my initial conversation, right? And you still don't know what you're talking about. And we're seeing more of that, even to the extent of at least edit the copy and paste. Just take that out. Where it says, do you have any, let me know if you need me to refine your questions. Yeah, I do. All right. Number 2 was prove you have the capital. I think that was fairly easy. Pick up the phone and call. I do think that that's a superpower. And again, the hard part is, you're probably not going to get the broker. You're probably going to have to leave a voicemail, but that's okay. I don't think that that's bad. Highlight your experience, and LinkedIn is your ally. 100% agree with that. To me, reaching out on LinkedIn, it's direct to consumer. You're coming right to me. I can look and see who you are and what you're about. And number 5, to me, is probably the most important part, the network. Every community is pretty small once you start getting into the deal space, and networking around, including with other buyers. What they passed on may be the gem that you're looking for. And former guest Colin King and the Capital City folks, that's exactly what they do. We're all friends. We're all in this together. The next one is how to stand out to business owners. I think that getting through the broker is one thing, but the buyer is assuming that, once you get the SIM, it gets easier, and it doesn't. It actually gets harder. So why don't we start with, what are the unwritten rules of interacting with a business owner?
Yeah, I think that first meeting, and again, you're going to be able to speak better to this. I'm just going by hearsay here. That first meeting you have with the business owner, you're not negotiating the price that the company's for sale. You're not grilling them about specific metrics in their business. You're really trying to understand, tell me about your business. Okay. When you get a new sale, how do sales come in? How do you guys process the sales? Things like that. So-and-so, maybe you have a theory on the industry of pay-per-click ads. I don't know. Or advertising on Google. Why haven't you guys done that out of curiosity? Things like that. Another good one too is trying to understand the owner's relationship with their clients. Because the big thing you want to be careful of a lot of these businesses is you buy the business, the owner leaves, and all the business's clients were loyal to that owner. Now that the owner's gone, okay, what's the business here? So just more qualitative stuff, I would say, than drilling into the numbers early on.
I've always said, you only have one shot to make a good first impression, right? And showing up with, 500 questions that AI generated, it doesn't really bode well. And I suspect that the industry is going to go almost to a secondary layer. You execute your NDA, you're qualified, you got the SIM. Now you want to talk to the owner. All right, well, first things first, let's cover and see what questions we can already get answered for you. And I think that's going to be a real thing. I think that there's so many buyers out there, and I think there's so many sellers that are thinking that this is almost predatory. And I think the relationship, I have a job. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. My family's been in entrepreneurship. I'm looking for my first deal. That resonates more, I think, with business owners than buyers realize.
Yeah, the other thing there too is as much as you're determining, is this business right for me as a buyer, the flip side is also happening. The seller is saying, is this person the right person to buy the business? So I don't know, maybe you're really into baseball. You can talk about your hobbies too, to try to resonate with them so they know that you're a real person.
Well, and you see all the influencers and such in TikToks about, you got to get the relationship with the owner right out of the gate, and I think there's a certain aspect to that, but just a little bit. I think somebody doesn't want to deal with somebody that's being a jerk. But at the end of the day, there's X's and O's and blocking and tackling of doing a deal that every business seller is going to want to make sure. And just because you and I like the Cubs does not mean you're getting my deal. The other side is buyers need to understand the highest price is not always the best buyer, and that does happen.
And I think the dynamics of these interactions generally change the larger the transaction size is. So the smaller the transaction size is, it's a lot more emotional. The larger the transaction size is, it's a lot more transactional.
That's a great point, and probably one of the best points of our conversation, because I don't think people realize that the bigger the business, and again, the more sophisticated the parties, again, it becomes transactional. Not that you're not a great guy, Mr. Seller. It's just when there's more than one comma, things get a lot more serious because they can, right? And the scrutiny and all the other things of evaluating an opportunity get magnified versus, like you said, the emotional side on the individual buyers, where it's, I don't say payment driven, but it's SBA and payment, and can I design the life I want? That's kind of the way it goes. So our other three things on the winning business owners, it's real easy. I mean, we already talked about preparation. If there's some domain expertise, right, you probably need to know the industry lingo. And lastly, it is dating. There's some give and take that goes in figuring out whether you want to go to the prom together or get married, or whatever analogy you want. Last thing, Tupelo has a great function, with the preferred buyers. Why don't we talk about that? We'll have the QR code and we'll have the link in the show notes, but let's talk about that. And it's not exclusive to, this is Indiana. This is everywhere.
Yeah. So again, with the whole thing that's happening is there's a lot of buyers, they're coming through. We have a way for buyers to become a preferred buyer, and there's it'll show up in the broker system that they have like a check mark or some sort of star in the system that they have specific capital to buy the business. And this whole preferred buyer program is helping buyers stand out inside a broker's system, so the broker can evaluate these buyers a lot quicker than you having to go through the NDA process and that sort of stuff. So it allows you to stand out in a broker system a lot quicker.
I can tell you, we're sending it out regularly in all of our newsletters, and we encourage people to do that. I think you're just going to have to miss out on a deal or two before you realize that, it's really not that big of a deal to do. And I think if you would just take a few minutes to do it, you're off to the races. To kind of wind this thing up, let's talk a little bit about Tupelo. Before we got started, I was wondering where the puck is going. How long has Tupelo been running? And what's the next 3 to 5 years look like? Or 1, 3, and 5 for that matter.
Yeah. So we've been around for 4-ish years now, and we're the largest CRM operating system for M&A advisors and business brokers in the country. We have the second largest marketplace by inquiry volume in the country too. So things are growing, which is good. We're looking to expand our footprint to continue growing our presence with business brokers and M&A advisors across the country. And then where we're going in the next, year or so is we're really focused on helping M&A advisors focus on that 1% of high quality buyers rather than that 99% who are never going to buy a business from them. We're doing things like these deal qualification agents, screening buyers and things like that to make sure that the broker's time is adequately allocated to revenue driving activities.
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun. A lot of people enjoy the industry as far as what it does for them economically. But I've been around long enough that I enjoy your professional curiosity, how to make this industry better. Because I totally believe that entrepreneurship is such a backbone of the economy, and enabling this whole process to work and work well. I just think that you're certainly onto something. So I've enjoyed our relationship. I appreciate, all the time you spend with us monkeying around, trying to figure out, where the puck's going. I like to be on the front end of that.
Yeah, the future is very bright. And I think a lot of the advisors out there that do adapt to systems like Tupelo are positioning themselves, very strongly in the future to be able to sell 50, 100, 200 companies in a year. And then at that same token, buyers who are interacting with tools like Tupelo are going to have a lot better buying experience than they're not.
All right. Well, George, as a repeat guest, we'll have all your contact information in the show notes, but where can people find you?
Yeah, Tupelo SMB.com is a good place to start. And then if you ever reach out to me, LinkedIn or Georgia, TupeloSMB.com is a good place to find me.
Rock on. All right, George, as always, my man, I sure appreciate your time and hanging out with me. And it's been a few months, but let's not wait so long next time.
Perfect, Ed. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to the Defenders of Business Value. If today's episode helped you think differently about building or selling a business, follow the show so you don't miss what's next. And if you want to become a more informed, confident owner, the one who knows how to grow, protect, and eventually exit at maximum value, subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. And if you're ready to talk about your next deal, connect with me on LinkedIn. So until next time, we'll see you soon.